The Zorvani Empire had conquered 17 star systems in less than 10 years. Their warships blocked out the stars wherever they went. Their soldiers were tall, powerful creatures covered in dark scales, and they had never lost a battle. When their fleet surrounded the small human colony on Velthor Prime, every alien commander expected another easy victory. Kyle Patterson stood on the broken wall of the colony's last defensive position. He was a man of 43 years, with short gray hair and a face marked by old scars. Behind him, 3,000 human civilians hid in underground shelters. Women, children, elderly people, families who had come to this distant world hoping for a better life. Now, they waited in darkness. Listening to the sounds of alien ships overhead, the colonial militia had started with 200 soldiers. Now, only 47 remained. Most of them were not real soldiers at all. They were farmers, engineers, doctors, and teachers who had picked up weapons when the invasion began. They had fought bravely. But bravery was not enough against the Zorvani war machine. Kyle looked up at the sky filled with enemy ships. Reinforcements from Earth were coming, but they were still 6 days away. 6 days might as well be 600 years. The Zorvani would not wait that long. A loud broadcast echoed across the colony. It was the voice of Overlord Kethril, the Zorvani ground commander. His words were translated into human language by a computer. Humans of Velthor Prime, you have 1 hour to surrender. Lay down your weapons and open your shelters. If you do this, we may show mercy to your civilians. If you refuse, we will kill every single one of you. No prisoners. No survivors. This is your only warning. The broadcast ended. Silence fell over the ruined colony. Kyle gathered his remaining soldiers in the underground command bunker. They stood before him with tired eyes and dirty faces. Some of them were shaking. A young man named Danny Peters, who had been a farmer 3 weeks ago, looked like he might cry. An older woman named Linda Howard, who had taught children before the war, held a rifle with white knuckles. Kyle looked at each of them in turn. He saw their fear. He understood it. He felt it himself, though he had learned long ago to hide such feelings. "I am not going to lie to you," Kyle said quietly. "We cannot win this battle. We are 47 people against an army. The smart thing would be to surrender and hope for mercy." No one spoke. No one moved. "But I have seen what the Zorvani do to worlds that surrender," Kyle continued. "I have seen the bodies. I have seen the slave camps. Surrender will not save anyone. It will only make dying slower and more painful." Linda Howard stepped forward. She was 52 years old, and her hands were still shaking, but her voice was steady. "Then we fight. We make them pay for every step they take." Others nodded. Danny Peters wiped his eyes and gripped his weapon tighter. Kyle felt something warm spread through his chest. Pride, perhaps. Or love. These were ordinary people, not trained warriors. But they were willing to die standing up rather than live on their knees. All right, Kyle said. "Then here is what we are going to do." He spent the next hour explaining his plan. It was not a plan for victory. It was a plan for making the enemy suffer. He showed them where to hide, where to plant explosives, where to set traps. He taught them how to move through shadows, how to strike quickly and disappear, how to make a larger force afraid of a smaller one. The Zorvani attack came at dawn. 10,000 warriors in powered armor marched toward the human positions. Hover tanks floated beside them. Gunships screamed through the sky. It was an overwhelming display of military power. Overlord Kethril watched from his command ship, expecting the battle to end within minutes. The humans would be crushed like insects beneath his boot. The first Zorvani soldiers entered the ruined colony. They moved carefully at first, expecting traps. When nothing happened, they grew confident. They spread out, searching for the hidden humans. That was when Kyle Patterson began his work. He moved through the shadows like a ghost. The Zorvani had advanced sensors, thermal imaging, motion detectors. None of them could find him. He had spent 20 years learning how to become invisible, how to move without sound, how to kill without warning. The first Zorvani patrol died without making a noise. One moment there were 6 alien warriors walking through a destroyed building. The next moment there were 6 bodies on the ground. More patrols followed. More patrols died. The Zorvani commanders grew confused. Their soldiers were disappearing. Their communications were full of panicked reports. Something was hunting them in the ruins. Kethril ordered his forces to advance faster, to overwhelm whatever human resistance remained. Thousands of warriors pushed deeper into the colony. They found the traps that Kyle had prepared. Explosions tore through their ranks. Buildings collapsed on top of them. Hidden defenders fired from positions that seemed impossible to reach, then vanished before the Zorvani could respond. But it was Kyle himself who did the most damage. He appeared from nowhere, struck with terrible precision, and disappeared again. He killed dozens of warriors in the first hour, then hundreds. The Zorvani soldiers began to panic. They started shooting at shadows, at each other, at anything that moved. By the 4th hour, entire units were refusing to advance. Soldiers who had conquered worlds were now trembling with fear. They whispered to each other about the human demon who could not be killed, who could not be caught, who seemed to be everywhere at once. Kethril screamed orders from his command ship. He threatened his own soldiers with death if they retreated. But fear is stronger than threats. By the 5th hour, the Zorvani advance had completely stopped, and then they began to run. It was not an organized retreat. It was a rout. 10,000 of the galaxy's most feared warriors fled from a ruined colony defended by 47 humans and 1 very dangerous man. When the last Zorvani ship lifted off from Velthar Prime, 6,000 alien bodies lay in the ruins below. The humans had lost 11 defenders. 36 remained, battered and exhausted but alive. Kyle Patterson stood on the broken wall and watched the enemy fleet retreat into the darkness of space. His hands were covered in alien blood. His body ached from wounds he had ignored during the fighting. But the civilians in the shelters were safe. The colony had survived. 6 days later, the human reinforcement fleet arrived to find the survivors waiting for them. The soldiers from Earth stared in disbelief at the battlefield, at the thousands of dead aliens, at the small group of farmers and teachers who had somehow held against impossible odds. Kyle said nothing to them. He simply walked to the nearest medical ship, lay down on a bed, and slept for 18 hours straight. He did not know it yet, but he had just become the most feared human in the galaxy. And the Zorvani Empire would never forget what had happened on Velthor Prime. 3 months after the siege of Velthor Prime, the Zorvani High Council gathered in their great chamber on the homeworld. This room had seen countless discussions of conquest and expansion. The walls were decorated with trophies from 100 defeated species. The Zorvani had built the largest empire in the known galaxy. They had done it through strength and fear. But today, the mood in the chamber was different. Today, the rulers of the empire were afraid. Supreme Admiral Vorthax stood before the assembled council members. He was an old warrior who had led fleets across the stars for decades. His scales were gray with age, but his eyes were still sharp. Right now, those eyes were filled with something his soldiers had never seen before. Terror, the council. Vorthax began, his voice steady, despite his fear. I come before you to discuss the incident on Velthor Prime. What happened there was not a normal military defeat. It was something else entirely. Something we have never encountered before. Matriarch Selvani, the oldest member of the council, leaned forward in her massive chair. Explain yourself, Admiral. We sent 10,000 warriors against a handful of humans. How did we lose? Vorthax activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. The image was blurry and corrupted, but it showed the ruins of the human colony. Dark shapes moved through the wreckage. Zorvani soldiers fired their weapons at targets that seemed to disappear like smoke. Our warriors reported that they were being hunted by a single human, Vorthax said. The creature called Kyle Patterson. He did not fight like any enemy we have faced before. He appeared from nowhere, killed our soldiers, and vanished before anyone could respond. Our sensors could not track him. Our thermal imaging found nothing. It was as if he existed outside of normal space. Another council member spoke up. One human? You expect us to believe that one human defeated 10,000 of our finest warriors? Not defeated, counselor. He broke them. Vorthax changed the display to show medical reports. Look at these numbers. 6,000 dead. Another 2,000 wounded. And among the survivors, more than half have been deemed unfit for further combat duty. They wake up screaming. They cannot hold their weapons without shaking. They see the human in every shadow. Silence fell over the chamber. The council members looked at each other with growing unease. High Matriarch Selvani spoke again. There must be an explanation. Some human technology we have not seen before. A cloaking device. Combat drugs. Something that made this creature more than an ordinary being. Vorthax shook his head slowly. We considered all of these possibilities. We captured 3 human prisoners during an earlier engagement on a different world. We questioned them extensively before they died. They told us that Kyle Patterson was considered exceptional among humans, but not unique. They said there were thousands like him. Thousands. The word echoed through the chamber. The humans call them special forces, Vorthax continued. Soldiers trained specifically for this kind of warfare. Soldiers who are taught to survive behind enemy lines, to fight against superior numbers, to never surrender and never give up. The prisoners said that every major human military has such units. They estimated the total number at several 100,000 across all human worlds. The council members began to speak over each other, their voices rising with fear and confusion. Some demanded immediate war against humanity, wanting to destroy the threat before it could grow. Others called for retreat, for avoiding any further conflict with this dangerous species. High Matriarch Selvani raised her claw for silence. The chamber fell quiet. What do we know about these humans? She asked. What kind of creatures are they? Vorthax pulled up more information on the display. They evolved on a planet called Earth, a harsh world by most standards. Their history is filled with constant warfare against each other. They have been fighting since before they developed written language. War is not something they learned. It is something built into their very nature. Wait, then they are savages, someone said. Primitive creatures, Vorthax replied. That is what makes them so dangerous. They are not savages. They have art, music, literature, science. They build great cities and explore the stars. But beneath all of that civilization, they still carry the instincts of predators. When pushed into a corner, they become something else entirely. Something that does not think about survival or victory. Something that only thinks about making the enemy suffer. The council debated for hours. Plans were proposed and rejected. Some wanted to send 100,000 warriors to crush humanity once and for all. Others pointed out that if one human could kill 6,000 Zorvani, then hundreds of thousands of such humans would be an unstoppable force. Finally, High Matriarch Selvani made her decision. We will not continue this war, she announced. We will pull back our forces from human space. We will observe them from a distance and learn more about their capabilities. But we will not provoke them further. Several council members protested. The Zorvani had never retreated from a war they had started. It was against everything their empire stood for. Selvani silenced them with a cold look. We have conquered 17 star systems because we were smarter than our enemies. Continuing a fight we cannot win is not strength. It is stupidity. We will wait. We will watch. And when we understand these humans better, we will decide our next move. The decision was recorded in the official archives, but the details of what had happened on Velthor Prime were classified at the highest level. Overlord Kethril was stripped of his rank and sent to govern a distant moon, far from any position of importance. Soldiers who spoke about the battle were punished. Records were destroyed. The Zorvane Empire did not want anyone to know that they had been defeated by a single human soldier, but rumors spread anyway. Stories passed from ship to ship, from world to world. The name Kyle Patterson became a whisper in the darkness, a warning to anyone who thought humans were weak, and somewhere on a refugee transport heading back to Earth. Kyle Patterson himself knew nothing of any of this. He sat alone in his small cabin, staring at his hands and remembering the faces of the people he had killed. He did not feel like a hero. He felt tired and sad, and very much alone. He had no idea that he had just changed the balance of power in the entire galaxy. 2 years passed after the siege of Velthor Prime. The Zorvani Empire expanded in other directions. Carefully staying away from human space, new worlds were conquered, new species were enslaved, and the Empire grew richer and more powerful with each passing month. But Overlord Kethril could not forget what had happened to him. He had been one of the most respected commanders in the Zorvani military. He had led armies to victory on a dozen worlds. Warriors had begged for the honor of serving under him. Now he was nothing. The High Council had taken away his rank, his ships, and his honor. They had sent him to a frozen moon on the edge of nowhere, governing a mining colony of 3,000 workers. Every night, Kethril dreamed of the human called Kyle Patterson. He saw the shadows moving in the ruins of Velthar Prime. He heard the screams of his soldiers as they died. He woke up shaking, covered in cold sweat, his heart's pounding with terror. He hated Kyle Patterson more than he had ever hated anything in his long life. When his intelligence network reported that Kyle Patterson had been assigned to a diplomatic mission in neutral space, Kethril saw his chance for revenge. The human would be traveling to a place called Nexus Station, the largest trading hub in the sector. It was neutral territory where many different species came to buy and sell goods. The Zorvani had no official presence there, which made it perfect for what Kethril had in mind. He gathered what remained of his loyal followers, 47 warriors who had survived Velthor Prime and shared his hatred of the human who had destroyed their careers. They were broken soldiers, haunted by nightmares. But their desire for revenge burned hot enough to overcome their fear. Kethril stole a stealth corvette from the mining colony's defense force. He loaded his warriors aboard and set course for Nexus Station. This time, he would not underestimate his enemy. This time, he would have the element of surprise. Kyle Patterson arrived at Nexus Station 3 days later. He was accompanying Ambassador Grace Mitchell on what was supposed to be a simple trade negotiation with several alien species. The ambassador was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. Known throughout human space for her skill at making deals, Kyle wore civilian clothes and carried no visible weapons. To anyone watching, he looked like an ordinary middle-aged man, perhaps a bodyguard or an assistant. His hair had gone completely gray in the 2 years since Velthar Prime. There were new lines on his face, and his eyes held a deep tiredness that never quite went away. He did not want to be here. After Velthar Prime, he had asked for a quiet assignment, something far from combat and danger. The military had sent him on diplomatic escort duty instead, saying that his reputation alone would protect any mission he joined. Kyle had not argued. He never argued anymore. He just did what he was told, and tried not to think too much. Kethril watched the human from across the station's main marketplace. The former overlord had difficulty believing what he was seeing. This was the creature who had slaughtered thousands of his warriors? This tired, ordinary-looking man with sad eyes? One of his followers whispered to him. He looks weak. Perhaps the reports were exaggerated. Perhaps he had help that we did not know about. Kethril was not so sure. He remembered how Kyle had moved through his lines like water flowing through cracks in stone. He remembered the bodies, killed with a precision that seemed almost artistic. This human was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with appearance. We take no chances, Kethril decided. We will use neural disruptors. We will paralyze him before he can react. Then we will take him somewhere quiet and make him tell us his secrets. After that, we will kill him slowly. The ambush was planned for the following evening. Kethril chose a maintenance corridor far from the main areas of the station, a place where no one would hear sounds of struggle. His warriors positioned themselves along the route that the human would take back to his ship. 40-7 warriors with military-grade weapons against one unarmed human. The odds were overwhelming. There was no way Kyle Patterson could survive. Kyle walked through the corridor with Ambassador Mitchell beside him. The ambassador was talking about the negotiations, pleased with how well they had gone. Kyle listened with half an ear, his attention elsewhere. Something felt wrong. The corridor was too quiet. The air had a strange smell. He stopped walking. Kyle. Ambassador Mitchell looked at him with concern. Is something wrong? Close your eyes, Kyle said quietly. Do not open them until I tell you. What? Why would I? The lights went out. The corridor plunged into complete darkness. Ambassador Mitchell heard sounds around her. Strange sounds, thumping, cracking, something that might have been a scream, cut off almost before it began. She kept her eyes closed as Kyle had told her, though she did not understand why. The sounds continued for perhaps 30 seconds. Then silence. You can open your eyes now, Kyle said. His voice was calm, unchanged, as if nothing had happened. The ambassador opened her eyes. Emergency lights had come on, casting a dim red glow over the corridor. She looked around and felt her stomach turn. 40-7 dead Zorvani warriors lay scattered across the floor. Their bodies were twisted in ways that should not have been possible. Their weapons were still in their hands unfired. They had not even had time to fight back. Kyle stood in the same spot where he had been before. His clothes were not even wrinkled. His breathing was perhaps slightly faster than normal, but otherwise he showed no sign of effort. How did you... Ambassador Mitchell could not finish the sen. Tance, we should report this to station security, Kyle said. There will be questions. When Zorvani was still alive? Kethril lay against the wall, his body broken, but his eyes still open. Kyle had left him alive on purpose. Kyle walked over to the former overlord and crouched down to look into his eyes. I remember you, Kyle said softly. You commanded the forces on Velthar Prime. You gave the order to kill 3,000 civilians if we did not surrender. Kethril tried to speak, but only blood came from his mouth. Kyle leaned closer. Go back to your masters. Tell them what happened here. Tell them that Earth is not afraid. Tell them that if they come for us again, we will be ready, and we will not be merciful. Stood up and walked away, leaving Kethril bleeding on the floor. Station security arrived minutes later. They found the ambassador standing in shock, surrounded by dead aliens. They found a single survivor who would never walk again. And they found a message burned, capped into the metal floor, beside Kethril's body, written in the Zorvani language. The message said, Tell your masters, Earth is not afraid. The attack on Nexus Station sent shockwaves through the galaxy. 47 Zorvani warriors had been killed while attempting to kidnap a human diplomat. The incident happened on neutral territory, in front of witnesses. With evidence that could not be denied or hidden, the Zorvani Empire officially claimed that Kethril had acted alone, without orders from the government. They called him a rogue criminal and condemned his actions. But no one believed this lie. Everyone knew that Kethril had been a high-ranking military commander before his disgrace. Everyone understood that his attack was revenge for what had happened on Velthar Prime. The humans demanded justice. They wanted the Zorvani Empire to apologize publicly and pay compensation for the attempted kidnapping. The Zorvani refused. They had never apologized to anyone for anything in their entire history as a species. War seemed inevitable. Human military forces began moving toward the border between the two civilizations. Zorvani fleets gathered in defensive positions. Both sides prepared for a conflict that could destroy entire worlds. But inside the Zorvani High Council, there was only confusion and fear. We must strike first. Admiral Vorthax argued during an emergency meeting, a massive attack on their core worlds before they can mobilize. We have more ships, more soldiers, more resources. We can overwhelm them with sheer numbers, High Matriarch. Salvani shook her head slowly. And what happens when we face their special forces? You saw what one of them did to 47 armed warriors. One human, Admiral, unarmed, in complete darkness. How many such humans do they have? Our intelligence estimates suggest several 100,000, another council member said quietly. Spread across all their military branches and colony defense forces. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Vorthax tried to sound confident. Surely those numbers are exaggerated. The humans would want us to believe they have more such warriors than they actually do. And if the numbers are accurate, Salvani asked. If we invade their space and find ourselves facing an army of Kyle Pattersons, what then? No one had an answer. The debate continued for weeks. Intelligence officers brought more reports, each one more disturbing than the last. They had gathered information about human military history, about their endless wars against each other, about their willingness to die rather than surrender. They had studied human biology and discovered that these creatures could ignore pain that would disable a Zorvani. They had learned about something called adrenaline that made humans faster and stronger when they were frightened or angry. They are the perfect soldiers, one intelligence officer reported. They evolved on a world that was trying to kill them at every moment. They survived by being more stubborn, more vicious, and more creative than anything else on their planet. War is not something they learned. It is something they were born to do. Finally, Emperor Kethmorvox himself intervened. He was the supreme ruler of the Zorvani Empire, a being of immense age and power. He had guided his people through centuries of expansion and conquest. Now he would guide them through this crisis. The Emperor sent a secret message to the human government. He requested a private meeting with Kyle Patterson, just the two of them, on a remote asteroid far from any witnesses. He wanted to understand this human who had caused so much fear among his people. The human government agreed. They gave Kyle the choice of whether to attend, and to everyone's surprise, he said yes. Kyle arrived at the asteroid alone, as requested. He wore simple civilian clothes and carried no weapons. A Zorvani shuttle picked him up and brought him to a small building on the asteroid's surface, where the Emperor waited. The throne room was designed to intimidate. The ceiling was impossibly high. Strange lights flickered in patterns meant to confuse enemy minds. The Emperor himself sat on a massive throne made from the bones of conquered enemies. He was larger than any Zorvani Kyle had ever seen, his scales dark purple and gleaming with ancient power. Kyle walked toward the throne without hesitation. His footsteps echoed in the vast chamber. He stopped a few meters from the Emperor and waited. The Emperor studied him for a long moment. His eyes were golden, slit-pupilled, ancient beyond human understanding. "You are smaller than I expected," the Emperor said finally. His voice was deep enough to shake the floor. "I hear that a lot," Kyle replied calmly. "Your species is young. You have only been traveling among the stars for a few centuries. Your homeworld is a single planet on the edge of nowhere. Your population is tiny compared to our empire." The Emperor leaned forward. "By every measure that matters, you should be beneath our notice. And yet here you stand, having killed 6,000 of my warriors and destroyed the career of one of my most promising commanders. You terrify my entire empire. Explain this to me." Kyle considered the question. He could have been arrogant. He could have boasted about human superiority. Instead, he simply told the truth. "Because we do not know how to quit," he said. "You have conquered 17 star systems because you are bigger and stronger and more advanced than anyone you have faced. But you have never fought anyone who refused to stop fighting. You have never met anyone who would rather die than give up." "That is madness," the Emperor said. Kyle agreed. "But it has kept us alive on a dangerous planet for 200,000 years. And it will keep us alive for 200,000 more." The Emperor was silent for a very long time. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I could kill you now. My guards are hidden in this room. They could cut you down before you took a single step." "You could try," Kyle said. There was no threat in his voice, no challenge, just a simple statement of fact. "If I ordered my fleets to burn your homeworld to ash, what then?" Kyle smiled, though there was no happiness in it. "Then there would be survivors. There are always survivors when humans are involved, and those survivors would never stop coming for you. They would teach their children to hate you, and their children would teach their children. Generation after generation, forever. You might win the battle, Your Majesty, but you would lose your peace of mind. For the rest of your empire's existence, you would be looking over your shoulder, waiting for the human who comes to take revenge." The Emperor's scales flickered through colors that Kyle could not interpret. Fear, perhaps, or something close to respect. "You speak of your people as if they were one being with one mind." "In some ways, we are," Kyle said. Every human carries every other human with them. Our ancestors, our families, our friends, our children. When you threaten one of us, you threaten all of us. That is what makes us dangerous. Another long silence. Then the Emperor made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Leave this place," he commanded. "Go back to your people and tell them that the Zorvani Empire will not trouble humanity again. We will maintain our borders, and you will maintain yours. There will be no war." Kyle bowed slightly. "Thank you, Your Majesty." He turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused and looked back. "For what it is worth," Kyle said, "I hope we never have to fight. I have seen enough war for one lifetime. I think maybe you have too." Then he walked away, leaving the most powerful being in the galaxy alone with his thoughts. That night, Emperor Kethmorvac sat on his throne and thought about the small human who had shown no fear. He thought about a species that would rather die than surrender. He thought about what it would mean to make enemies of such creatures, and for the first time in his very long life, the Emperor was grateful that there were some battles he would never have to fight. 10. Years passed after the siege of Velthor. Prime, the galaxy changed in ways that no one had predicted. The Zorvani Empire kept its promise. Their fleets stayed on their side of the border. Their warriors no longer threatened human colonies. The war that everyone had expected never came. Instead, there was an uneasy peace, built on mutual fear and grudging respect. Other alien species watched what had happened and drew their own conclusions. If the mighty Zorvani were afraid of humans, perhaps there was good reason. Treaties were signed with Earth. Trade agreements opened new markets. Humans found themselves welcomed in places where they had previously been ignored or treated as primitives. Kyle Patterson knew very little of this. He had retired from military service at the age of 53, tired of violence and wanting nothing more than silence. The human government had offered him medals, promotions, speaking tours, political positions. He had refused all of it. He wanted only to be left alone. He bought a small farm on a colony world called New Oregon. It was a quiet place, far from the main shipping routes, with green hills and clean air, and nobody asking questions about his past. He grew vegetables in the rich soil. He raised chickens that wandered freely around his property. He sat on his porch in the evenings and watched the sun set over the distant mountains. Most days, he managed not to think about Velthor Prime. Most nights, he slept without dreams, but the galaxy did not forget him. Among the Zorvani, his name became a word for terror. Mothers frightened their children into obedience by whispering that the human Patterson would come for them if they misbehaved. Soldiers raised their drinks in dark taverns and said to each other, "May Patterson never find you?" It was half joke, half prayer. Young Zorvani warriors studied his tactics in military academies, trying to understand how one being could defeat thousands. They never found a satisfactory answer. Some concluded that he must have been using unknown technology. Others believed he was simply a monster in human shape, something beyond ordinary flesh and blood. A few brave scholars suggested that maybe humans were simply different from other species in ways that the Zorvani could not understand. On Earth and its colonies, Kyle Patterson became a legend in a different way. Schools taught the story of Velthor Prime to children. Movies were made, each one more exaggerated than the last. His face appeared on recruitment posters for the military. "Be the soldier that empires fear," the posters said. Kyle hated all of it. He had not fought for glory or fame. He had fought because there were people behind him who needed protection. That was all. Nothing more. Still, visitors came to his farm. Veterans who had served with him wanted to shake his hand one more time. Historians wanted to record his memories before they faded. Diplomats wanted to understand the man who had changed galactic politics. Journalists wanted exclusive interviews. Kyle turned most of them away politely. He had nothing to say that would satisfy their curiosity. He was just a tired old farmer now, growing tomatoes and fixing fences. The soldier who had terrified an empire was gone. One afternoon, a young woman arrived at his farm. Her name was Karen Brooks, and she had just completed her training with Human Special Forces. She was 24 years old, with short dark hair and serious eyes. She stood at his front gate, looking uncertain. "Sir," she called out. "My name is Karen Brooks. I am sorry to bother you, but I was hoping I could talk to you for a few minutes." Kyle looked up from his garden. He saw her uniform, her nervous posture, the way she held herself like someone carrying a heavy weight. "Come in," he said after a moment. "I will make coffee." They sat on his porch while the sun moved slowly across the sky. Karen told him about her training, about the things she had learned, about the doubts that kept her awake at night. "They tell us stories about you," she said. "About Velthor Prime, about the way you moved through the enemy like they were not even there. They say you killed 6,000 warriors by yourself." Kyle sipped his coffee and said nothing. "I wanted to meet you," Karen continued. "I wanted to understand. How did you do it? What made you different from everyone else?" Kyle thought about the question for a long time. He had been asked this before by generals and politicians and scientists. He had never found a good answer. "I was not different," he finally said. "I was just a man who had something to protect. The people in those shelters, the civilians waiting for rescue, they were depending on me. I could not let them down. But the things you did, the way you fought, it was not human. It was very human." Kyle corrected her gently. "That is what people do not understand about us. We are not peaceful creatures pretending to be warriors. We are warriors pretending to be peaceful. The violence is always there, underneath the surface, waiting. Most of the time, we keep it controlled. But when someone threatens the people we love, when we are pushed into a corner with no escape, we stop pretending." Karen listened with wide eyes. She had expected tactics and techniques, the secrets of a legendary soldier. Instead, she was getting philosophy. "Zorvani thought they understood war," Kyle continued. "They were wrong. They fought for conquest, for territory, for resources. Those are good reasons to fight, but they are not the best reasons. The best reason to fight is for the people standing behind you. When you fight for something you love, you become something more than just a soldier. You become unstoppable." He looked at her with those sad, tired eyes. "I did not defeat 10,000 warriors by myself. I had 47 soldiers backing me up. I had 3,000 civilians depending on me. I had the entire human race standing with me. Whether they knew it or not, that is what made me strong. That is what makes all of us strong." Kieran stayed until sunset. They talked about war and peace, about duty and sacrifice, about the weight that soldiers carry long after the fighting ends. Kyle told her things he had never told anyone, about the nightmares and the guilt and the faces of the dead that he saw every time he closed his eyes. "It does not get easier," he warned her. "The things you do in combat, they stay with you forever. You will have to learn to live with them." "How do you live with them?" she asked. Kyle gestured at his farm, at the growing vegetables and the wandering chickens and the peaceful hills. "You find something worth living for," he said. "Something that reminds you why you fought in the first place. For me, it is this place. The quiet, the growing things. The knowledge that somewhere out there, the people I protected are living their lives in peace." Karen left as the stars came out. She shook his hand at the gate and thanked him for his time. "You'll be fine," Kyle told her. "When your moment comes, you will know what to do." She nodded and walked away into the darkness. Kyle watched her go, then returned to his porch. He sat in his old chair and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, alien empires watched humanity with fear and respect. Somewhere out there, historians wrote books about his legacy. But Kyle Patterson did not care about any of that. He had done his duty. He had protected his people. Now, it was time for others to carry the weight. He closed his eyes and listened to the wind moving through the grass. Tomorrow, he would plant a new row of vegetables. Tomorrow, he would fix the fence that the chickens kept escaping through. Tomorrow, he would continue living the quiet life he had earned. And somewhere in the galaxy, a young soldier named Karen Brooks looked up at the same stars and prepared herself for whatever would come next. The legacy of Kyle Patterson would continue. Not because of the enemies he had killed, but because of the people he had inspired. That was how it should be.